Om Shri Sai Ram, offering my most humble and loving salutations at the divine lotus feet of our beloved Bhagwan, Shri Satya Sai Baba. We are indeed blessed and fortunate to be able to bring out this series on Sai Ram Katha as narrated and as shared by Bhagwan. So let us start this evening's journey with our prayer and we take it forward from there. And please join us, me. O Lord, take my love and let it flow in fullness of devotion to Thee. O Lord, take my hands and let them work incessantly for Thee. O Lord, take my soul and let it be merged in one with Thee. O Lord, take my mind and thoughts and let them be in tune with Thee. O Lord, take my everything and let me be an instrument to work for Thee. Sai Ram, and welcome yet another episode of his story through the eyes of his boys. And in that we have Sai Ram Katha, a very humble attempt to share with you Ramayana as narrated by Bhagwan. Ramayana as narrated by the avatar himself, some behind the scenes stories, and something unique from his side, and also an attempt to compare and learn about the Satyasai avatar too. What are the similarities and what are the differences between the two avatars? Why the avatar comes? What are the scenarios in which the avatar comes, takes a form, and leads a life? To what end? So we have been taking this journey forward in exploring that environment, the situations, the circumstances in which the avatar of Ram happened. And we also are trying to look at the scenarios in which the Satyasai avatar happened for a better understanding. So let us continue this journey, and for that I'm again pleased to welcome my brother Ranganath Raju. Sai Ram Ranga.
Sai Ram.
Sai Ram. Welcome Ranga. Raju, we should continue this beautiful journey, and I think last week we literally gave it a good start, and I'm grateful to Bhagwan that we have been getting good responses. And I must at the outset, Raju, appreciate and thank all our viewers for their suggestions, for their comments, and for their alertness to point out if we miss something. So we had one or two comments, one comment actually, which highlighted that we missed a point and our representation was wrong. And for that, I thank the audience for continuing to be with us and sharing their also perspectives, which I am happy that we can put it together. So Raju, ready for today evening?
Yes, brother. Yeah.
So let's start with this journey tonight. Do you want to say anything about the last week which we covered?
Yeah, I would like to start off our session with with an insight that one of our teachers had told us once.
Hmm.
Now, they were in Bhajan Hall, and Swami was talking about the upcoming Ram Navami celebration that is scheduled in Parthi, and they were talking about various Ramayanas in that context. And there are at least celebrated 27 versions of Ramayana, and surprisingly, all those versions start off as a conversation between one person narrating about Rama to someone else. So, for example, if you take Valmiki, it starts off as a conversation of Narada's recollection of a personality called Rama, who happens to be the most ideal. Or if you take Tulsidas, his one talk starts off as a conversation between Yajnavalkya and sage Bharadwaja. If you take Kamba, similar is a scenario where Bharadwaja recollect of similar nature. May not be Kamba, but of one of the poets. But in that context, one of the comment that was made by Swami was very insightful. Swami said, but Ramakatha doesn't start that way. So it just he made a comment. It is for us to derive. If you look at Ramakatha Rasavahini, it starts off in the first person narration. It is Swami. It does not start off as a conversation between two people, but it starts off as an own account, is his own autobiography in some sense, and that is what we are here to discuss about.
Beautiful. I think very, very valid and a beautiful point to highlight that, because they have to mention, the authors, that where did they hear it from.
Yes.
If they write Purans also, they have to say where did they hear it from. So they have to say that Shiva said to Vayu, Vayu said it to Surya, and Surya said it to somebody, and that's how it has come down to me. And similarly, Valmiki Ramayana also is that reference of how the whole concept came. And here Bhagwan is narrating it in the first hand, no doubt about it. It is a fantastic insight. Excellent. Raju, let me start off this evening by sharing a kind of a definition of, Ramayana. As we know, Ramayana and Mahabharata is considered to be itihas. And I thought it's nice thing to know, because we tend to, in English, we tend to present this as a mythology. And in mythology, people get this impression that this could be an imaginative story, just presented to teach us some values of life. Whereas it is not a mythology, it is not, and Bhagwan is to pun the word actually for that. He is to say it is mythology, you say it is because it's mystical in nature, not false. It is not myth, it is mystical. It is not myth, it is mystical. That's how Bhagwan would pun it. And that time when you hear Bhagwan, you felt that he was just making it sound beautiful. But now you realize that we have this confusion. Was it a myth narrated as a story to teach us values, or was it real life? Now in Sanskrit, these scriptures are called itihas, and a very beautiful definition came to me about what is itihas. And let me read the Sanskrit. It is dharma artha kam mokshanam upadesha samanvitam purva vratam katha yuktam itihasam parichakshate. Now this is a very important aspect to understand. And it says itihas is the past happenings told as stories, which bestows on the listeners dharma, arth, kam and moksha. So the important point to note here is purvavratam katha yuktam. So it is purvavratam means past happening, katha yuktam narrated as a story. So there is an writer's liberties can be also seen in the scripture, but it is a purvavratam. It is not a imaginative story. It is purva. It is past happening captured as katha, and that is what is called itihasa. Itihasa parikshakshate. So what it bestows is dharma artha. So when you read or you study these itihas, you are automatically given this exposure, this blessing of dharma, artha, kama and moksha. Isn't that beautiful, Raju?
Yes, it's beautiful, brother. In fact, one of the scientific studies, which has also come out as a book about mastery and perfection, which talks about the specialities of human being. It talks more from the science point of view. The author says human can be differentiated on three aspects. Human alone can create music. And he says, but the most important thing that human creates and which sustains for centuries is the ability to tell stories. If you look at our Indian history, this this beautiful point or insight was taken by our forefathers, and message after message is weaved into story, because human mind is built in such a way that it catches story and it lives with that story, and messages are turned into those capsules of stories, and they are let down the centuries of humanity, and we have followed them. They have become part of folklore, they have become part of our culture, they have become part of our ways and means of life, they have become part of our ceremonies. You look at the names in which people give them. I know some people who were called as Ramayana, and and there is another interesting aspect also comes to this, brother. If you look at, for example, dharma, artha, kama, moksha as a way of life derived through itihas, because if you look at that comment of the Lord where Swami says study of human or humanity is actually the real study that a man should be undertaking. In one of the comments, Swami says the world is the school that you should be looking at. Now, these are the established lives. People have established ways and means of attaining certain things in life. And we have the know how, we have the process methodologies, we have the SOPs, all laid out for us in the beautiful form of stories. It is up to us as to how do we pick up.
Beautiful. Wonderful. So let us continue this journey. And as we were discussing the era, the backdrop in which the avatar came and comes, so let us take this journey forward in understanding the era. And the next topic we are looking at is social governance. So Raju, if you can explain to us what do we mean by social governance?
Yes, brother. So here in under this aspect, we will be looking at as to how the society was governed through various institutions. So two major institutions that were holding the society together in those times, or rather, even to this day, but in a very different form, is one is the occupation, and another is the stage of life. Now, if you even to this day they hold, if you, for example, if you look at why European countries or why certain Western countries have a lot of social expenditures, because the age of the people is kind of going up. That is where ashram dharma comes in. And why certain countries excel in certain fields, for example, China in manufacturing, is because they have the skill in certain occupations, the Varna dharma. So it is here Varna dharma and Ashrama dharma. Varna dharma is more about the occupation. Society was divided on the basis of occupations, and life and society was also divided on the basis of life stages. So under Varna dharma we have Brahmana, Kshatriya, Vaishya, and Shudra. As Swami often says, Brahman is not defined by birth, but it is he who always lives in Brahma Jnana, or lives in Brahman is the Brahman. Kshatriya, we all know, the one who offers protection. Vaishya is the one who undertakes trade and business. Shudra is the one who offers his body to for the service of the society.
See, here I would like to highlight, and again a misrepresentation many times happens, is that Brahman is considered to be the superior most, and the Shudra is considered to be the meanest, lowest form. Whereas this misinterpretation has started some maybe 1,000 years back, when the whole corruption started. So it is a long corrupted format we have been noticing. But I would, because this is a very good point here to highlight what was the situation in the Rama's era. Because pre-Rama, we have Vedic dictums like Purusha Suktam, in which it is declared also, Brahmano Mukhamasid, Bahura Janyakratah, Uru Tadasya Vaishya, Padhyagum Shudro Jayata. So if you can, maybe Raju, if you can highlight that part and then explain, then we'll jump into Rama's era.
Yes, and Swami elaborates on this phrase also very beautifully. He says, Brahmano Mukhamasid, Brahmans have come from the face of that Purusha. And what does face stand for? Face stands for, that head stands for knowledge. The custodians of knowledge in a society are called Brahmins. The ways and means of life have been created by them. And Kshatriya is a Baho Rajanya Krutaha. From that Mahapurusha, from his
Hands, the
shoulders,
arms.
arms and shoulders is the origin of Kshatriyas. It is a very beautiful way of allegorical way of saying, or the way of story, that Kshatriyas represent those who offer protection or security to a society. It is not just physical security. It's not that, it's not just police or military. It is even the lawyers, people who protect the institutions of the society, people who protect the contracts of the society, people who protect even the means of production of the society. They are in some sense of Kshatriyas. And Uru Tadasya Vaishya. Uru, uh, one of the famous scientists, I'm not able to recollect her name. She was giving an interview in which she was asked a question, a beautiful question. She was asked as to what do you consider is the hallmark of progress of civilization, and she answered that it is actually the thigh bone. It's the length of the thigh bone. Why is that so? Because the length of the thigh bone determines how much you have been helped by other being. So if your thigh bone is sustained for so many years, it is because, even if a fractured thigh bone is sustained for so many years, it is because someone would have helped you. If your thigh bone breaks, you will not be able to move. They would have helped you to feed yourself, and they would have helped you to live a normal life, offered you protection. And hence the fractured thigh bone is in some sense a proxy for the development of society. And it is to this thigh the uru is called, and Vaishyas are compared to. They are the ones who offer help and service to the society. Vaishya, anyone who offers trade, who offers business, who connects means of production to the means of consumption, becomes a Vaishya. And Shudra, Pado, they are the ones who bear the weight of the society, as Swami says. Without feet,
Padbyagam Shudro Ajayata.
Padbyagam Shudra Ajayata. You cannot expect the society to move forward without those feet. And if you read the discourse, Swami says, and the next line after that he says, imagine an ant crawling on the feet, or an ant bites your feet. Immediately tears or a thorn pierces your foot. Your eyes would start watering up. Eyes would not say that I am superior, I am different from that feet. It is because they are part of the same body. And he says, so is the society.
I remember saying that even when you touch the feet of the Lord, so your head goes down.
Yes.
So imagine the Brahmin, if you think of it like that, has to bow down to the feet of the Lord. So unfortunately this got misinterpreted and miscalibrated about the hierarchical part of it. But the beauty of this was that it was a distinction only and primarily based on the aptitude and the activity undertaken. It had got nothing else apart from that. In fact, Ramayana also has a very beautiful explanation where you are, I'm sure you will elaborate on that, and we'll find all the stratas of society and all the class of people were well educated, were well
Absolutely.
dharmic. So they were all superior, but they chose to do. And I'm sure you have some illustrations for that, Raju, going forward.
Yes, brother. Yes, if Varna, if you look at various important characters in Ramayana, for example, look at Valmiki. Valmiki was not per se Brahmin by birth, but it is because of his devotion, it is because of his sadhana that he has become Brahmin by his nature. Or you look at, for example, Vishwamitra. Vishwamitra was a Brahmin by birth, but he was a Kshatriya by birth, but through sadhana again he becomes a great Rishi, Brahmarshi. Or we take, for example, the case of Parashurama. Parashurama was a Brahmin by birth, but by his sheer nature, he becomes a Kshatriya. And now, on the contrary, you have the hero Ravana, rather the villain Ravana. He is a Brahmin by birth, but he becomes Rakshasa by his pravritti, as Swami says, because of his. All of us know his ways and means of living, the way he usurped someone else's property and wives. So, and all of them, there is no ironclad division between one Varna to other. we there are instances where you see that someone, like a charioteer who is just riding the chariot of the king. He happens to be the most confident of person with whom the king can share his mind. There are beautiful conversations between Dasharatha and Sumanta, or the beautiful conversation between Sri Rama and Sumanta. It is because they consider the charioteer, who happens to be, I mean, if you take by the definition of birth, he happens to be a Shudra. He is the bearer of the king's mind.
See, another thing which I would like to highlight here is that during the Ramayana, we also would find out that a person like Guha was Rama's friend, and they were student
Yes,
friends. It's another eye-opener thing. So a king, a prince, and a commander or leader of a boatman, who today's in parlance would be considered as a low, casted person, were friends. And you see, there was no distinction and there was no discrimination. Ram accepts his, hospitality, and in fact, when Bharat comes with the whole army, they are received by Guha and transported with him. So it's a very phenomenal thing to watch, that even if he was studied together, he chose to carry on his family tradition of maintaining the boat and all that fishery, if you say so. But he was part of the society, so nobody looked down upon them. The only thing was that they were doing a different job per se. So Varnashram was so beautifully used for, I think, to pass on the skills, to secure specialities, to build a specialized knowledge, because those people who did X job, they continued and passed their skill sets down. But it did not mean that they were lower or higher in the society. But whatever they did was excellent, because it had the investment of generations in them. So
absolutely.
Varnashram became a methodology or a science of preserving skills, nurturing a society, and strengthening it by providing the right input. So like Swami would joke also, if everybody becomes a king, then who will serve whom? you know you need somebody to listen to your command, otherwise who are you commanding when everybody is king there? So the society requires different stratas, and all were required based on their aptitude. So there was no force on anybody. Everybody was free to do what their aptitude, what their abilities were able to handle. But they were respected for whatever they did. There was no
Yes,
looking down on them, isn't it?
absolutely, brother. Even as you mentioned beautifully, that the hierarchical structure is absent in some sense. It is only respect for meritocracy is what existed. If you look at the way in which the Brahmin walks into Rama's court and questions him, saying that you have promised me to give the land before you left for Aranyavasa. Now you have returned, but you have not kept up your word. That's when Swami says that Rama takes the staff of the Brahmin and throws it and says, "Go and take all the land that falls. That entire land belongs to you." My point is, look at the way in which the Brahmin comes out and questions Rama in the court. Or look at, for example, the way Dobi. Now, there is a beautiful description in Dobi realizes after accusing Sita for whatever foolishness that he had. He comes. It seems he comes almost on a daily basis to the palace, and he is hesitant to enter. He wants to apologize for what he had done. The point is, he had the access to Rama, and one day it says one day he walks in. As Swami says, he walks in and then goes to Rama and is brought in Rama's presence. And if you look at the entire description, there is no exaggeration about the way in which this Dobi entered, or whether he was allowed to enter or not. No, it is the right of the subject of Ayodhya to go and meet his king. He is king by his profession, by his occupation, and he is also. If you look at this history of Dharma Shastra by Kane, he talks about a beautiful line in which he says, Dharma Shastra, the Hindu, Indian Dharma Shastra establishes, it starts from Vasishtha, in fact. He was one of the key proponents, and comes Yajnavalkya. He says, even the king is the subject of Dharma. It is Dharma which is the supreme master and leader of the kingdom. And the amount of respect you get is proportional to the amount of Dharma you follow. In some sense, this kind of defined how the society was weaved in those times.
Another aspect of Varnashram we need to notice is that people could play two roles. So you could represent two Varnas also, depending on your caliber and depending on your ability. Like from positive to negative, if you look at Hanuman, for example, he was a king, he was a prince actually, then he could rule, but he chose. That means he was a Kshatriya. By Varnashram category, Hanuman could be presented as Kshatriya. He was a king. He had the ability, he had the power, he was born there, he could have ruled very well. But he chose not to. Instead, he became a devotee. He showed his valor, but he was more personally, his life was very devoted life. First, he served his friend Sugriv, and then when he found Ram, then it was only Ram for him. So imagine there a Vanar who was Kshatriya by caste chose to remain as, I would say, a Vaishya by nature, because he was serving. Obviously, he could show the caliber of a Kshatriya, he could show a caliber of a poet as a Brahmin, because Hanuman has also penned down scriptures, and nobody can compare Sri Hanuman's ability of knowledge and skills. So he was a Brahmin, he was a Kshatriya, and he was a Shudra in a way, if you look at it. So Hanumanji has shown a variety of roles. Similarly, I'm sure you just mentioned about Ravan, right? Raju?
Yes.
He also played two roles.
Absolutely. He was a Brahmin. He could do ceremonies, as some of the versions of Ramayana say, that in fact he was the one who officiated Rama's entry onto the bridge, and he was the one who fixed that muhurtam in which the war should, as per some of the versions,
and and Rameshwaram, that Havan, the Shiv Puja was done by Ravan himself as a head priest. So he became Brahmin at that time. So you can imagine. So what it shows is a very beautiful thing. Like Parshuramji also, you mentioned just now, he also played two roles, a Brahmin and a Kshatriya. So Varnashrams were created, as I see and understand, is a beautiful way of creating hierarchy, creating skill sets, resources, specialization, without putting it into a hard brackets that okay, since you have become a scholar today, you must only study. You can't learn music, you cannot learn warfare. It is not like that. You could do anything you liked. But categorization of Varna was that. So they could play multiple roles, they could exchange roles, and they could remain without roles if they choose to.
Absolutely.
But the commonality was in Varna Dharma was that everybody was Dharmagyani. So they knew what Dharma is, they knew what. So everybody studied together. That's a very unique aspect which I find.
Yes,
equality that we talk about today.
And if you look at, if you very carefully look at the conversations that have happened between people when they meet for the first time. For example, when Dasharatha meets Kausalya's father, or when Hanuman and Rama meet for the first time, or when, for the matter, when Hanuman and Ravana meet in the court, or when Vibhishana and Rama meet. All those first interactions, nowhere would you find a question asking about the caste. Nowhere. It would always be, what are your antecedents, or what is your lineage? Who is your father? What was he doing? And in fact, they would introduce themselves as I am so and so, the son of so and so, who was doing this sort of work, and I am doing this sort of work. And equally, the person who is, who is kind of receiving him, hosting him, would also introduce the same manner and saying that please welcome. But nowhere would you find this interaction of caste coming in. It is, as the recent research is clearly establishing, it has come in more in 900 or 950 AD for certain reasons of historical importance.
So that mess has happened. Okay, cool. And let us now look at it, ashram dharma.
Absolutely.
This is another beautiful demarcation of the society. And what I realize is that what Bhagwan always said, do whatever you like, but remember you are God.
Yes.
Do whatever you like, but know that the purpose is to know you are God. So for Swami, we wanted a music, so he said, okay, have. He gave us the best instruments, best performances, everything. You wanted to dance, he gave us cultural, everything, whatever you want. You wanted gymnastics, he made a gymnasium. So everything was given to us, but the focus was to know that you are God. Know that everything is God. It is divine. So the whole purpose of life is this. So if I look at these two ashrams, Varna Dharma and Ashram Dharma, I realize that Varna Dharma allows you to act, but why are we acting is governed by Ashram Dharma. So how you should act at different ages is governed by Ashram Dharma. How a person's journey of life must be governed and must be carried forward is beautifully captured under Ashram Dharma. What is your view, Raju?
Yes, brother. I completely agree. If you look at the current economic challenges that most of the Western countries are going through, is precisely because of this. Or if you look at, for example, the way India is also aging, you look at states like Tamil Nadu, where the average age is much higher than the Indian averages. Or you look at states like Uttar Pradesh or Rajasthan, the population is much younger. Here the population is much older. So age, in fact, the stage of life determines your entire spectrum of economic activity surrounding you. The way you consume, the way you save, the way you work, the way you invest is determined by your age. And this was the insight that was acted upon uh, by our Indic forefathers. It is based on this insight or these beautiful human derivative actions that the institutions of life were built. So they have constructed our dharma shastras. In some sense, they were code of conduct, manu dharma. And in fact, if you look at, there are almost 240 dharma shastras which speak about different stages of life. Now, each of them talk about what a human should do when he is in the age of brahmacharya, and they define what brahmacharya is. The student, he being a student, he or she being a student, he or she being a grihastha, a householder, what he or she should do, and as an vanaprastha, what they should do, and sannyasa, what they should do. And Swami also beautifully gives a description that these, more or less, they would be around 25 years of age. The first 25 years of a life is brahmacharya, next 25 to 50 is grihastha, 50 to 75 vanaprastha, and 75 to 100 is the sannyasa.
Yeah, because this, as we had discussed before, in Kali Yuga, the age bracket is 100 years and an average. So I guess the division is done at 25 years each. And there is a very clear instructions, if I may say so, about how one has to conduct in a particular bracket of age. Unfortunately, because we have messed up, so we have an overlap of what we do in each age. So, like for brahmacharya, there is a very defined lifestyle. We will come to that when we look at Bhagwan, what he has done. And I think by default, he placed in front of us exactly how each ashram should be lived by. So
Yes.
technically speaking, let me run it through. So 25 years of brahmacharya, which is in English they say celibacy, but it is not just that. It is basically focusing in all the knowledge base which would help a human to reach the divine. So the acquisition of Brahman, to be in that knowledge of the Supreme and acquiring that knowledge, for that 25 years have been given. So the base work must be done. Kindergarten can't happen at 26. So kindergarten must happen at 5 so that you can finish by 25 everything. So I would say in a broader way, what I have understood is that first 25 years brahmacharya, in which the focus is primarily acquisition of knowledge and gyan, and remained on the focus of God. Then comes grihastha. It is actually a responsible age. You have acquired knowledge, now put it in practice. Fulfill all your desires, fulfill all your ambitions, fulfill all your vasanas, fulfill your responsibilities of life with the knowledge acquired, with the empowerment given to you through knowledge in brahmacharya. And once you have done it, can you imagine, when I look at myself today, I feel sorry that, okay, I have already crossed the grihastha stage. I should be in vanaprastha. So we should not be even talking. I should be retiring. So vanaprastha starts, which is actually withdrawal symptom, withdrawal from the chase of life. Now here
Absolutely.
it's a consolidation period, if I may use the term. We are consolidating ourselves. We have done our responsibilities. Now is the time to let go. And I remember Bhagwan guiding in a very beautiful parenting session. He said, as a parent, you take the decision when the child is in brahmacharya. In grihastha, the child makes the decision. Child in the sense that a grown up, but your son or daughter, they make the decision in consultation with parents. So when you can imagine that up to 50, as a parent, I am allowed to consult and I am able to give. If I see some need, I must interfere and tell him, and it should be consultation, but the final decision must be with the children. And then he says this beautiful, after 50-55, he says, you won't interfere, it is their life. So which means the parent must shut up and only answer when consulted, or if they see something drastically wrong, if they find deviation which is wrong for children, or when the child comes and says, parents, I need your help, I need your guidance, then you open your mouth. And then he says 70-75 plus, shut up, don't give any input from your side. Only if you are begged, then you tell, you may tell. Otherwise, just remain in your life fulfillment and enjoy yourself. See, if you look at this whole journey, it will resolve all the issues of parenting. But I wonder how many of us are, able to live that lifestyle in which we can say, now I have reached grihastha, or now I have reached vanaprastha. So what do you say, Raju? Vanaprastha doesn't
Absolutely,
mean going to
Bala.
forest, right?
Right. In fact, Swami, in a discourse on July 31st, 1996, beautifully elaborates on the stages of Vanaprastha. He says, so if I have to read out, he says, commencing from the full moon day, they must gradually cut down the food intake morsel by morsel. By the new moon day, they must stop taking food altogether. From new moon day onwards, they must increase their food intake morsel by morsel. And by full moon day, they must stop the food intake. If any kind of householder wants to serve food to the Vanaprastha, it must be served on leaves. Vanaprastha should not dine in others' home. Vanaprastha stage is full of austerities. It is the stage that precedes sannyasa. Swami gives, in fact, he goes on to give detailed elaboration as to how the daily schedule of a Vanaprastha should be. The Lord has laid down all the answers for us. It is actually for us to go and dive into those vast treasures of literature that he left us and find the answers. And Swami, he beautifully defines as to what each stage should be. Uh, whenever when our culture taught us that we should be looking at loka samasta sukno bhavantu, he came and redefined, saying that no, make it samasta loka sukno bhavantu. In the same way, when a Telugu scholar was talking about brahmacharya, Swami corrected him, saying brahmacharya is not just the celibacy as you mentioned, but it is he learns the ways and means of pursuit of Brahman. In Grihastha, he say, and another scholar who imbibed these mistaken meanings. He said Grihastha ashram is actually an impediment to your spiritual growth. Swami corrected him, saying that no, it is not an impediment. It is actually, in some sense, it is an enabler. It gives you a partner to hold on in your life. And Vanaprastha, Swami gave a beautiful definition, and also the way in which Vanaprastha should be led. Sannyasa, all of us know. In fact, in one of the sessions, Swami clarified that sannyasa does not mean that you go to the forest. No, it is actually detachment of your mind. It is head in the forest and hands in the society. And he talks about in the song also that he wrote. He says, "Atti janakunaku rajayogam na andarani mokshamu andane satya dharmamu shanti premalato." He says how this sannyasa should be followed. He gives the example of Janaka, where he was the king, the decision maker, the focal point of every stream of life. I mean, you take, for example, the attractions of that money can give. You take the fears that the enemies would keep upon you, or you take the insecurities. He was the focal point. Midst all those, he was called a rishi, rajarshi. Atti janakunaku andarani mokshambu andene. And he says how Swami explains through that song. I think it is up to us to observe carefully and learn as to what the Lord is indicating. Similar was the case with Ramayana. Yes, go on, sorry.
No, please carry on. And because you mentioned Janak, Raja Janak, I was thinking the same thing from Varnasram perspective, that Raja Janak was a Kshatriya.
Yes.
But by his deed, he was also a Brahmin of very high standard. So he could play two roles at the same time. While being a king, he was a scholar. So his mind was totally focused on God, yet he could execute all his royal duties. Even though he lived in a palace, but his heart was very simple. He lived a very simple life.
And in fact, Brother Swami talks of the story where Janaka was attending the lectures of Yajnavalkya, and his assistant comes and says, "Lord, your palace is on fire." The king does not get up. He does not even look at him. He continues to look at Yajnavalkya.
No, because Yajnavalkya had to ask him, when he was asking, yes, "Show me Brahmagyan," Yajnavalkya said, "Can you give me your mind?" He said, "Given."
Absolutely. Absolutely.
He said, "Given," and he sat down there. And then people, so imagine the caliber of the person who said, "I've given my mind," means I've given. Now I can't think, I can't talk.
Yes.
So it's, but you have to be Rajarishi Janak for that.
In fact, in that episode, the people sitting around Janaka, the disciples were all Brahmins by birth. But they were shaken. Yajnavalkya points out, saying who is actually a Kshatriya and who is a Brahmin, who has Sattva-guna and who has Rajoguna. He says the one whose palace is burning, he is unmoved, but yet the hearer of the news is getting agitated, who has attachment. In fact, I think these are itihas, as you mentioned. It lays down through stories principles for us to pick up and learn and imbibe in our lifetimes.
Beautiful. See, all of these, are instilled, if I may put it, and established in Brahmacharya Ashram. And Brahmacharya happened in our Gurukul. So I think it will be appropriate for us to, go through that detail about Gurukul. What does actually Gurukul meant?
Exactly.
What is this? Because we hear, what concepts today we have about Gurukul is through movies, mostly, and through just some statements here and there. And most of the time when I speak to people, we have a concept of, okay, a rishi must be sitting there in a hut and children must be going and living with him and all that. But what Ram, Bhagwan has explained Ramayana, and what Ramayana we read and we understand Gurukul concept, it is mind-boggling. And I think it will be appropriate, Raju, if we spend little time to go through that concept of Gurukul.
Yes,
So
sir.
before you jump into that, let me give a quick thing about how the cities were divided. The smallest section, as it was called, Gram, the village as we understand, and I don't recall exactly how many number of houses must be there minimum to call it as a gram, but there is some kind of standard that if you have so many houses, it together it's called a village. So that is a village life, that is gram. Then you have something like a metropolis, B grade cities, small cities and towns, they were called nagar. Then you had the metropolis like Delhi, Bombay and all that, so it's called Mahanagars. Okay, and then the combination of all of these together, if you look at the whole area, that was called Janpad. So basically a city in today's parlance, village, town, city, metropolis and a state. So Janpad are like a state of Andhra, state of Bombay, Maharashtra. So that is Janpad. And the beauty of this is, in Ramayana it explains very beautifully that there are some areas outside the city limits, outside the Janpad limits, which are purely forest, and they are consciously and consciously kept like that for allowing animal kingdom and the plant kingdom to flourish without disturbance, and cultivation can happen. So there is a lot of area for cultivation, for forestry and all that. That area, even though next to a Janpad, a state, was not officially under any king. So no king owned that land. It was no man's land, even though it was next to the king. And that is the place which our rishis and sadhus would take it up, because it was open and they didn't want to be governed by anybody per se, so they could live there and make their ashrams there. So it was a kind of a common place for all the Janpads, that okay, anybody wanted to go there, they can go and nobody will interfere. But in the hierarchy of kings, a king can be a place, of one Janpad. So it's like a chief minister of the state today. He was a king. But if he owns 2-3 states, some number, then he will be called Chakravarti. So if he holds the whole thing, then he is like a supreme Chakravarti. So Dashrath was known to be a Chakravarti, and his empire stretched the whole, what we know today as Bharatvarsh. But that is another discussion, we'll have it later, as to how it was demarcated and how the jurisdiction of other kings intervenes. But the beauty of understanding is that that common area of forestry was a place where rishis would go and build their ashram and create a Gurukul there.
Absolutely.
So it was not only a residential place for the rishi, but because the rishi stayed there, so people came to learn from him, and people sent their children also to them. So it became that Gurukul took up a shape of a learning center. So it was not just the residence of rishi, it became a learning center of rishi, of the whole country for that matter. And
Absolutely.
anybody was allowed to go in as long as you have the aptitude to learn and study. So depending on your caliber, you are given. So this is how one should really understand that how the Gurukuls were independent of any king because of their physical presence in a forest, yet they had the right of protection from the king. So that is why a rishi could, Vishwamitra could come to Dashrath and say, I need your sons, protect me, because I am doing penance, I am doing havan, and these Rakshasas are disturbing me. So even though Dashratha did not officially have it under his jurisdiction, but because there was a request, he was supposed to take care of it. And that is why he was called an emperor, that he was overshadowing everything. So it's a very beautiful concept. And now we come to the ashram vyavastha. So Raju, now take us through the journey of what actually is the ashram and how small or big we can imagine it to be.
Yes, brother. In fact, just to before I get into this ashram, I just like to add to another point that you made
Sure.
is the influence of the kings. In fact, one of the political analysts, I'm sorry, I'm not recollecting his name. He talks about, the entire war of Ramayana is in some sense behind the scenes was actually one kingdom trying to establish its dominance over the other. This Dandakaranya was the common point between between this Rakshasa kingdom and the Dashratha kingdom. Each was trying to establish its dominance over it, cultural dominance over it, one through love and other through fear. In fact, the description of where Sri Ramachandra moves to Sharabanga's ashram, and the rishis there hold his feet, and then they describe the horrors that they're going through. That is when Rama decides. He had spent 11 years in that Chitrakoot Parvat, and a beautiful place. He had all the access of water and the fruits, and it has all the facilities. And yet, in spite of that, he decides that he will go and stay in Dandakaranya. It is because the Rakshasas are exerting their cultural influence over that land. And now, in some sense, Rama is, as a king, he is going and saying that I will set up my father's influence here. And if you look at the argument that Shurpanaka takes up with Kara and Dushana, she says, no, you are looking, in fact, the conversation where she says, no, I kind of was insulted with these brothers. They say, so what? I mean, so it's fine. He has rejected you, so be it. But then she uses the argument, saying, don't you realize they're actually the princes of Dasharatha who are walking, they are trying to exert this influence in your forest. That is what enrages Kara and Dushana. I says, how can that be? Let us take up arms. And she uses the same stick to enrage even Ravana. Says, Ravana, your influence is wading away in the forest. People are not scared anymore of Ravana, but they are paying their obeisance to Rama. And Rama says, no, I should set this right. So that's how the war of dominance was going on this common land of no man's land. Now, as you mentioned, and this was the land which held ashrams. Unfortunately, our movies, as you said, they kind of show this ashram as small hut with 2-3 students, and the guru, being a small sadhu or a rishi who is trying to make his both ends meet. No, it is completely misleading. If we look at the recent research, at one point, Kanva, Rama describes Kanva's ashram to Lakshmana, and he says it is like the circular. It's like it goes in circles and circles. Each circle had one stream of excellence, and you graduate from it, you go to the next stream, and like you graduate from the undergraduate and you go to postgraduate, then you go into the inner circle, and there you have again different streams of excellence, and then you do a doctorate, you go to the next smaller circle, and then you do a postdoctorate, you go to that next smaller circle. Those circles were 8 or 9 circles, and in the middle of it was the sage Kanva, who is supposed to be the master of excellence in every field. Or if you look at, for example, the conversation between Chandogya Upanishad between Uddalaka and Swetaketu, Uddalaka says he is from the era which just preceded Rama. Uddalaka tells Swetaketu that, Swetaketu, I have an ashram of 10,000 students. Take care of it. Why are you going out in search of something else? And Swetaketu says, I am not interested. I will set up my own ashram which can feed 20 or 25,000 students. This was the size of the ashrams. If you look at the accounts of Chinese traveler of Nalanda, his name starts with F. I'm sorry, I'm quite bad in recollecting the names. This Chinese traveler talks. He kind of visited Nalanda uh, at its lull period. Even in that lull period, the waiting line was 7 kilometers. It says 220 villages were feeding Nalanda University. And he says Nalanda was just 20% of what Takshashila was. Takshashila was where Mahabharata was written, or Valmiki is supposed to have taught Ramayana
Takshila
to.
is, I think, the first documented university of the world
Yes,
in a way.
the word. And this was like 10 times of what Nalanda was. We can imagine the size of those ashrams. They are like a, a mini city which had end-to-end self-sustaining mechanisms to sustain hundreds of students, the families of teachers, and the servant maids. They had trade, but all were for creating knowledge, selfless knowledge.
Beautiful.
And even if you look at the education system, where Sana Singh in the culture Indian heritage of education, she describes as to how it was layered. The small teachers would teach the kids in their homes, and those were taken care by the societies around, where you go for bhiksha, and the householder gives a alms to the student, and then they go and feed the guru. And if you want to specialize a little more, then you go to those temple universities. If you look at NIRM University, NIRM Temple, it talks about the entire detailed description of what is the support that the king gives. He gives like 25 tulas of gold. It goes on to describe various support that king extends. Next level of university
Excellent.
is our massive forest universities, and then the universities like Takshashila, Nalanda.
It's a wonderful thing to see. Now, if you look at the whole thing, just a snapshot here, the Gurukul, there's ashram vyavastha was followed. Obviously, brahmacharya was the key here, and education model and the management system. See, when we explain the whole area, the way you have told now that so many specializations, it is like in the West you have, Harvard University is a full complex. Actually, it's a whole city in itself. Okay, if you go to uh, uh, Boston area, there are places just university place. That's it. The city is based on university. They have the airport, they have everything, because nothing else happens there except education. So you can look at how the whole concept has blossomed around there. So you can imagine the amount of management, even to manage that show, how superior, what an exposure the children must have in such a university area, such
Absolutely.
Gurukul. They would automatically know how to manage people, how to manage resources, how to lead a different style of life. So because they have lived that life themselves, they have lived through minimum requirements, because ashrams, they never allow you to expose too much. So imagine in the least amount of resources, you come out with the best, and they do a lot of research. So there is so much happening. And then you have, of course, the educational streams as you're talking about. And this is where I would like to show, you talk about the areas of knowledge that we are looking at. Raju, before we move forward, we have a suggestion for you. I think the man was called, Mr. Chaman has said, I think the man was called Havan Shang. I think the spelling could be there, different. Hon Shang is a Japanese scholar who you might be referring to. Anyways,
Yes, probably. Yes, probably. Yes.
okay, perfect. And some people have also given, yeah, Srinivas brother has given a reference of Lord Krishna. That yes, certainly Srinivas, you're right. Lord Krishna was, God is a different part, but he was a Kshatriya who became a Sarathi, which is a Shudra's job. So yes, in Treta Yuga also the demarcations were based on your aptitude and thing, but it had started getting diluted. In Dwapar, the dilution had started happening, not so strongly, but yes, as you rightly said, there the flexibility of Varnashram was still on. So thank you. Okay, so let us look at the streams. Raju, I believe they said there are 64 Vidyas, right?
Yes.
So we've just highlighted here certain heads from the scriptures. And can you imagine all of these Ved and Vedangas were part of your school studies? So every child was given this exposure. Isn't that interesting about the
Absolutely.
stream
And
of education?
everybody had access to it. I mean, where you just spoke of Guha and Rama being classmates, or even for that matter, Krishna and uh, Sudama were classmates.
Classmates, yeah.
All the teachers were experts in these, and they would have refresher courses like every 3 years or 5 years. In one of the conversation where Valmiki kind of expresses his inability to make it because he has to take a refresher course for his ashram teachers, and that is when Dasratha pleads saying that you should come and attend this function. And the similar is the case of Yajnavalkya talking about uh, how Ayurveda or, for example, Arthashastra should be addressed or should be taken up by different teachers who should be like kind of sharing the workload. A lot of research has gone into pedagogy, a lot of research has gone into the way in which lesson plans should be built and the way in which instructions should be given. Swami talks about a particular clipping in discourse. He says that students of those days were woken up early in the morning and they were given Gayatri mantra. This I've learned it from one of our senior brothers. Is actually was an answer to a conversation that happened in interview room where the father of this brother, so this brother's younger one was not so good in studies, so he was lamenting to Swami saying that Swami, my younger kid is not good in grasping. What should we do? Swami does not answer him directly, but a few days later Swami gives this discourse where he says this was the way in which the kids turned out to be very bright, and he goes on to explain that they were woken up early in the morning and then they were asked to chant Gayatri mantra. It is because it has certain vibrations which activate your brain cells. And then Swami goes on to elaborate the daily schedule. And he says how learning Vedas, how learning the Vedangas, how learning various Shastras, Upanishad, Puranas uh, helps in your kind of broadening your imagination, sensitizing you towards the facts of life and the challenges of life. Unfortunately, we have lost that heritage of education.
You know, one thing more I would like to point out from present context. Today, a lot of research is happening, and they are called. They have a special category, especially in the West, because I am exposed there. You know, they have a special kids, those who learn fast. They are gifted kids. They call gifted kids. That means they can pass in double promotion, or they can do faster tracks, and they can study more than what average child studies. So, and we have not yet made it into a full, I should say, a pure system which everybody around the world can follow. But when I look at Rama's era, that Treta Yuga, we notice that they had a flexible teaching style too. And it was purely based on the child. The speed of learning was based on the child. So like Ram, he finished the whole course, which could be considered equivalent to postgraduate or a doctoral, by the time he was 12 years old. And it is very sweetly written also, Bhagwan has written, that he finished few months before other three brothers. So three brothers were following him, but his grasping was faster than them. So when Valmiki actually tells Dashrath, he is reporting to Dashrath about the progress report of the children. He says Ram is faster, but other children are also following up. So they should all be done within few months. So he is giving him a heads up that you can expect their graduation ceremony to happen very soon. So Dashrath was delighted. And I read it in a very simple way, but then I realized that look at that whole concept, that it is depending on the child's strength to study and at the pace at which the child can learn and grow. So it was not thrusted on the children that everybody must learn at one particular pace. Like in today's education system, we do not have that flexibility. And we unfortunately either fail the children or we force a fast learner child to remain in the group and continue at the pace which is far less for him or her. But look at that era, they had already achieved that style of teaching which they can monitor each child development, each children's growth, and accordingly have the ceremonies. So traditionally speaking, what I can calculate, which will go in later on, Ram went to ashram, all the 4 brothers, around the age of 5.5, and by 12 he was done. So if you look at in 6-7 years, Ram and all the 4 brothers had done their PhD, which normally would take around 20-23 years. He had done it in just 7 years.
And Swami does not stop there. Swami goes on to talk about the travel after that. Very beautifully, Swami.
That part we'll look at the whole education system. But look at the whole the structuring. What I was impressed upon was that flexibility of learning, the flexibility of ashram was so much that they were so specialized that they could capture the development of each child and allow them to grow at their pace. It's such a phenomenal thing, And if you are like a prince, with have a additional responsibility of the country, then they were given additional subjects to study. That's what you are mentioning, that when they went back, they had to do extra courses on warfare and politics, so that to learn, because they are kings. So you can imagine the hierarchy of teaching also. I think it is fantastic to even look at those things. So you have shared 64. Actually, Raju, I also compiled certain streams from various sources, and if you want to highlight any of these to explain, these are the so-called topics. I am not sure whether we can say that these are the exact names or terminologies there, but this is what we get from our scriptures that were taught during that era. So you can imagine the scope which every child was exposed to. Your suggestion, your feedback on that.
So, brother, for example, some of these topics like music, medicine, or nirukta. So each of them would go on to become as an independent stream as the child grows up in the age. So each one, all of them, all the kids were kind of exposed to these subjects. Now, depending on the aptitude, you can choose, and then you can go on to be an expert in each of these fields. Like, for example, one of the topic that Ravana takes up was music, and he had a inclination for art of war, but he was such a great musician that we know of the story where he pulls out his intestines and kind of strings them to please Lord Shiva. And another of his brother, that is Vibhishana, he takes up the science of Nirukta. He goes on to kind of go in depth about language and why words are used and what is the logic of building the words. While his youngest brother Kumbhakarna, he goes on to take the food preparation, is the culinary sciences, which was supposed to be kind of invented by Nala, because he was a foodie, and because of his curse or blessing, he kind of spends half of his time is eating and half of time is sleeping. But my point is, all the three came from the same family, and depending on their aptitude, each one kind of specialize themselves in one stream. And if you look at Sri Ramachandra on the other side, 4 brothers kind of expose themselves not as much as Ravana. And Swami also talks about Sri Rama being an expert only in 16 vidyas, I mean at a physical level. Right?
No, 30, around 30. Uh, he had learned around 30 odd languages, subjects.
Vidyas, vidyas.
Whereas Ravan had exposure to all of these.
All the 64, yes.
Yeah.
And but the beauty was Rama knew how to. Swami talks about that knowledge, skill, balance, and insight, where you use your knowledge to kind of develop the skill and also balance the skill and knowledge, and that is where the insight into the usage of that science comes up, and that is what Rama exemplifies. If you
So
if
you
you
can
look at
imagine they were taught magic and spells as part
absolutely
of subject.
exactly. We find if you look at, for example, the conversations between Hanuman and Jambavan when Hanuman was hesitating to grow up to jump to Lanka, and Jambavan tells him that you can grow up, man. I mean, you know all those incantations, you know those spells, chant them, and you will grow in your size. And when he grows, there is no exaggeration. They just talk about it as a matter of fact. So he has become so big and he has taken off. And even when he is reporting back to Ramachandra after going to Lanka, the conversations was just a matter of fact. There is no exaggeration and there is no wow factor that, oh my God, did you do that? Did you become so small? Rama does not say that. Rama acknowledges it. Even you take the way in which Hanuman was reported to Ravana, and Ravana laughs off, saying, "Oh, is that all you have learned?" He's mocking him. In fact, he's not, he's not awed by what Hanuman did. He says, "Is that all? You are just a monkey. You kind of pulled out those trees. Yes, you knew how some of those vidyas where you can grow small and or become smaller, grow big." Ramana was not enamored. Ramana was not awed. He just talks out, listens to it as a matter of fact, and starts mocking him. My point is, those were appears like those were common streams of knowledge. Probably in the flow of time we lost them.
See, when this, I'm sure people who have visited Puttaparthi would have seen the Hanuman statue on top of the hill. And I recall that because it happened in our time, Bhagwan had created an exact replica of that Hanuman because engineers were not able to make this huge, and with that pose it was not getting balanced, and Bhagwan created the idol and kept it on the ground. He said, keep it on the ground, and it stood. And Swami said, just duplicate it, just replicate it, and that's how Hanuman was made. And Bhagwan exactly gave the height of 60 feet, and that is where I heard Bhagwan saying that this is the exact height when Hanuman leaped to Lanka.
Wow. Wow.
So, the statement made is not with an awe, with some kind of an extraordinary thing. It was like, okay, this is the height he took to jump. So he did not jump like a 16 feet, what was an average height in those times, but he grew to 60 feet and jumped. So you can imagine the whole concept which we today try to think of it as a poetic exaggeration by Valmiki or anybody is not actually a poetic exaggeration, it is a factual description.
Right.
So the poetic exaggeration could be the way he flew and the birds started falling off. That could be a poetic exaggeration. But the fact is, he did enhance his size to that much, or he became a small when he enters Lanka. So this also we'll see as we move forward about all these siddhis which Lord Hanuman represented and is claimed to be bestower of it, actually, according to Hanuman Chalisa. He's a riddhi siddhi data. So we'll look at it as we come to that stage. But yes, all these sciences, as you are mentioning truly, they were taught, and depending on the student's worth, their caliber, they could expertise, they could specialize in each area and use it. There was a Ravan's father-in-law who was a the greatest magician and a spell bearer. What is his name? Who was an architect also.
I'm
Mandodari's
sorry.
father.
Okay, I'm not able to recollect. Sorry.
I'm forgetting his name. He was who builds, like he was an architect by profession, but he was genius in doing these things, magic and spells, and that is where Rama. But anyways, the point is
Mayasura.
Mayasura. Yes, Mayasura. So they were all. So these sciences were taught. These sciences were taught, and that is the most interesting thing. But Raju, at this point, I am really, getting that excitement to compare it with Bhagwan. What he has built in Parthi and what he has built around the world is amazing to look back now. Now, if as a Sai devotees who have been exposed to Puttaparthi, who have been exposed to Bhagwan, for them it would be an interesting, comparison and understanding. And now keeping this whole concept, what Ram era was, what this ashram vyavastha was, what are the education systems, what are the governance systems. We have seen Varnasram, we have seen ashram vyavastha, we have seen these two areas, and now I would like you to let us jump into this and explore. Look at Puttaparthi, look at Bhagwan, and then let us compare it. How does it sound? How does that sound now for us?
Yes, I think that will be very insightful. We should no, we should do it.
So I have created some headings. So let's talk about it. So we have Puttaparthi. Now, if you look at it, what Bhagwan created for us in Puttaparthi was actually a Vedic model. Everything, whatever we have discussed so far, I think we can see it manifested in Prashanti Nilayam. And it is such a beautifully done place. So let us take each point and share your thoughts on this. Let's start with the ashram, what we call it as an ashram. See, today we think of ashram as the Prashanti Mandir, right? We think that only as an ashram. But I feel now, and you also have joined me, that ashram was not just that, what Bhagwan created. The whole campus was an ashram. So give us your thoughts on it.
Absolutely, brother. Like what we discussed, the sage. If you look at, for example, sage Bharadwaja, he was an inventor of. He was the one who invented electricity. He was the one who created those vimanas, and he was part of that. Valmiki ashram, the massive ashram. He himself later built an ashram. My point is, scientific research was happening. Medical facilities were there. Then every system of life was there. Now come back to Prashanti Nilayam or Puttaparthi. This is exactly what we see. And interestingly, the entire activities of the ashram, the focal point is Guru. You do whatever you want, be whatever you like to be, but never lose the sight of the Lord. He becomes the fulcrum of your daily life. Puttaparthi or Prashanti Nilayam is exactly that. You have professors who are doing nuclear physics. You have economists who are building econometric equations. You have computer scientists who are doing their AI models. You have doctors who are dissecting patients. You have engineers who are building massive buildings, massive structures. You have traders doing all sorts of trades. But for all that community, the focal point, fulcrum point, that axis was the Lord, was Swami. They did whatever they did, it is to please Swami. Because Swami is that center point and around which the entire activity moved. Take the hospital, take the university, take the entire Prashanti Nilayam campus, the core campus. Swami was that single point. And that massive structure, as you have said, is the ashram. And Swami built it and showed it to all of us.
So like in ashram, we had, ashram, you have Gurukul. So ashram has a portion of Gurukul where the Guru resides and his students live. That was our Vidyagiri campus. That is our Vidyagiri campus, I should say. So imagine the campus he created. The ashram is the full area, and then you have the Vidyagiri campus in which a brahmacharya life was practiced.
Absolutely. And
And if
that is, it is self-sustaining. It is
self-sustaining, yes.
yes. Go on.
And look at all the areas of child development, if I may use that terminology of today. All the areas of learning, all child developmental scopes, everything was in Vidyagiri. Today, if you look at it, we have planetarium there, we have gymnasium there, we have indoor stadium, we have external stadium, we have museum, we have world-class laboratories, we have big
Massive
auditorium,
libraries.
we have studios. Can you imagine today we have a hostel has a studio, college has a studio, mandir has a studio, and they are all used for expression of your own soul and your whole growth. And everything is focused, as you rightly said, towards the Guru, so everything gets sanctified. Isn't that beautiful? So the concept which we saw as in Rama's era, Bhagwan has already duplicated it, already created, not duplicated I should say. He has already created and shown us that this is the future. Whether you like it or not, the world is already looking at Ram Raj. And he has already shown us a beautiful model created there. And look at the whole concept, from studios to stadium to gymnasium to college, university, labs, planetarium, airport, for heaven's sake. And then you have a place called Mandir. Wow, where we see the culmination of all being there. Everything happens as a finale there. If you think that you have achieved something, you get your degree in Mandir. You know, your graduation happens in Mandir. You practice in the hostel, you perform in Mandir. So everything is done in front of the master. So only when the Guru says, check, you have passed, and we are happy. So imagine if everything happens in the ashram area, but if Bhagwan does not acknowledge, nobody is satisfied in the system.
Absolutely.
I think I love that whole concept now.
Yes, in fact, the way in which Professor Altaker describes Snatakotsava, where the convocation function, where the students are questioned by the experts in each field, and they are certified that they have passed, and all of them assemble in front of the master, and then they take oath saying that we have learnt, O Lord, O Master, we promise you that we will live by the values that you taught us. This is exactly what happens during our convocation. I was stunned when I read it. Like, I read it 2-3 times, and the picture of how our exams would happen, and then Swami would ask us to come to that convocation function and take the oath, the way in which you sit, the way in which you dress. Swami is very particular. It's because the entire effort is culminating there.
See, one thing we should notice that, traditionally speaking, all the programs, including the convocations, Snataka Utsava, happens in Mandir. So it was not a chance that Swami said, okay, we don't have place, come and do it in the Mandir. We had stadiums, we have auditorium, we have everything. But that final degree is only when the Guru says you are ready to go out.
Beautiful. Yes.
Isn't that beautiful? So look at how Vidyagiri whole concept is created. Let's talk about multi-ethnicity. I don't think we can find a better example of multiple ethnicity and uniformity than Mandir itself, the Prashanti Nilayam.
Absolutely. And you have if you look at just the cuisines that are served, you have South Indian food, North Indian food, then the Western canteen, you name it and you have it. Like I find it so many times very strange when I talk to my colleagues or in my office team. Now they would talk about certain Kerala language, certain Kerala movie being so special, or certain Kerala or certain Tamil cuisine being so special, or certain Japanese thing being so special, I would my expression would be, yeah, I know it, kind of thing, and they would say, do you know it? He says, yeah, we have lived with them. My cupboard mate was from Germany, and other one was from Australia, and we knew their places, we knew the way they lived. And when you go to mandir, I remember once one of these Buddhist person had come, and he explained to me as to how they would dress, the entire intricacies of the dressing. And other day, when one of these monks came, and everybody was looking at him with awe, saying that, what is the specialty of this dress? I asked him a question in Hyderabad. I asked him a question. You are supposed to be wearing this bead, but why is it that you are wearing something else? You should have looked at the shock on his face. He said, how do you know this? I said, I said, we have learned it in our student days. And it is because that is the environment with which we were bestowed. It's not just me or not the student. Any devotee that comes in, he has this experience, the entire world being a family, in a small family culminating in Prashant Nilayam. And similar was the case with our ancient ashrams or gurukulas. We just spoke of brother Chaman pointed out how Japanese scholar or the Chinese scholars came in, how people from Mediterranean region, how people from Atlantic, how people from Atlantis came in, studied in our ashrams, and we have
So I
we
think
have
we are
been
blessed to see that exact replica in our, yeah, in all the times we can recall. Our one of our brothers was from Mexico, many were from Europe and America and Australia. So we were living in that multiple ethnicity. So we were exposed to that. See here, I would like to point out about Varnashram, also about the whole concept. Look at how Varnashram is practiced and exposed in Prashanti. Your input first, Raju.
Yes, brother. In fact, this is something that stuns me. Morning, you look in Nagasaki, the people who are leading that Vedam, after morning Naga Sankirtan, by 9 o'clock, they are like lecturers, professors, doctors who go and
Engineers.
engineers. And evening they come back, they are musicians singing bhajans, offering songs to Swami, and discussing intricate philosophies of life and living. At one point, they are that Brahmin Varna, another point, they are that Vaishya or Kshatriya Dharma, and another point of time, they are again Brahmins. By activity, being focused on Lord, you are bestowed. We just a few minutes back we spoke about the ability of those characters to take up different varnas because of their endowed specialities. But here it is that God's grace, I suppose. It is your ability to focus on the Lord which makes you so agile to take up multiple varnas at one point in a single
But
day.
the similarity is that whatever is your aptitude, that is your prime duty.
Yes,
So if
absolutely.
my aptitude is to be a teacher, I can be a teacher, or I can be a banker for all I know. But because the education system is so fulfilling, the exposure is there, that when there is a need, I can wear Angavastram and dhoti and stand there and start chanting Vedam.
Right.
So we have seen our boys, our student brothers, who have taken a role of pujari also in mandir,
Right.
who have done puja and who do arti for Swami, and then next moment they can just change over and then become a dancer, or they can perform, or they can go and do anything they like. So it is a very beautiful thing which we notice in Parthi also, that Varnashram is there. Everybody is defined, beautifully defined. You are a doctor, you are a professor, you are an engineer, everybody, we can classify them. But that classification does not in any way indicate their hierarchy. It does not discriminate or tell them that you are superior or inferior. It is a role you play. And I think, Raju, one more thing you can point out is that, I think best place is Parthi to see that literally any caliber of a person can do any role. We can see Narayan Seva, you can see the Sevadals, for heaven's sake. I have seen judges and officers doing Narayan Seva, the Sevadals job. We have engineers who are serving Sai Gita, taking care of animals. We have one engineer who is our chef, who managed our kitchen. For heaven's sake, he is an engineer. So if you think of it like that, it is so beautiful that everybody is flexible to take up any role because of the love of God. And we can call them, okay, he's a kitchen uncle and kitchen auntie, but the fact of the matter is, that does not explain what is their spiritual quotient. And for that, we respect. So respect is based on your character, not because of the work. So the task can be anything. You could do any task, but your respect is based on your character and your personality. I think there can be no better example of Varnasram than Prashant Nilayam.
And look at the way in which people sit in mandir. I mean, whichever work you might be doing outside that gate, you are one and the same. All of us sit together and wait for the Lord. You might be the vice chancellor. Yes, you are given a special seat, but it is just that you get to sit on a little thicker sofa
cushion.
Cushion. Nothing else.
But yeah, that's also a very beautiful thing to note. Do you remember when President of India had visited Swami?
Absolutely, I was, yes.
You want to tell that because you were there,
No,
so you could.
Yes, when Swami, in fact, this was captured in video also. Swami creates Vibhuti. President Kalam was walking in, and Swami creates Vibhuti. The first person that Swami gives Prasad, the Vibhuti, was the President of India, and immediately after that was the person who is guarding President. He's just there as an AD. To him, Swami gives Vibhuti, and then everybody stretches their hand. So, in an instant, the differences of the occupation of the levels were just washed away in the presence of Lord. Everybody is equal in the presence of the Lord, and everybody is hankering for the love of the Lord.
The designations disappear, right at that moment it disappears.
Absolutely.
So I think Varnashram is very beautifully practiced in Parthi.
Exactly, brother. Even you look at the uniformity, the way in which you conduct yourself in ashram or the bigger ashram is same, irrespective of the work you do. There are certain do's, there are certain don'ts, and there is no compromise. Whoever you might be, you are expected to. You are not expected to do certain things, and if you are found doing, then you will have to face the music.
If you take the same thought for ashram vyavastha, and that also we can see in Bhagwan's model how all the four ashrams are beautifully, cohesively living and growing together.
Exactly.
So no one disturbs anybody. See, in today's society, we always feel, the brahmachari stage, student feels, oh, my parents are disturbing me. Or a sannyasi would feel that there is too much of distraction from grihastha and other people because they can't practice. Now look at the model which Bhagwan has created there. In that Prashanti Nilayam, Puttaparthi, you find all the four ashrams from brahmacharya, grihastha, vanaprastha and sannyas. And everybody is doing their job without disturbing anybody else.
All of them coexist, they learn together, they grow together, as Swami says.
Kalasi malasi, yeah? That's it.
Absolutely. And I think this is what the Lord probably wanted us to learn and implement even in our daily lives, much beyond the ashram. And the discrimination part, you are not discriminated on anything. Nobody asks you what caste you belong, where you come from. There is absolutely no discrimination on any of the facets of life. You are a human and you are loved and you are respected. And it's exactly what, in fact, Rama tells the guard when he reports to Rama saying that this Dhobi should be punished. Rama says no. Let him have his opinion. He is a human. He should be respected. He should be loved. Period. No more discussion on that. We see that happening in Prashantilayam every day.
See, another thing is that people may wonder that how come an ashram, which is supposed to be sattvic, if I may put it in a different words, okay, it's supposed to be very God oriented, how could commercial activity be part of it? So you see a different model of commercial activity in Prasanthi Nilayam. We have, I think, one of the very decent shopping arcade there. We have ice cream parlors, we have all the vegetable stalls, and we have big shopping area for photographs, for books, and for everything. So you have the full commercial activity buzzing in Prasanthi Nilayam. So what is the difference when that activity happens in the mandir, Prashanti ashram, versus anywhere else?
Yes, sir. Here, I think we should look at the intent as to why the commerce is happening. Commerce is happening not for maximizing profits, but it is actually for self-reliance. The commercial activity is undertaken to sustain the ashram inmates, to provide help to the ashram inmates. The commerce is taken up. Commerce is a tool for spiritual development. It is not an end in itself. Even this similar, in fact, similar is the way in which it gets defined even in Rama's time. Rama talks about Trai, sorry, it talks about Varta. There is a disturbance at the end.
Can you still see me and hear me?
Yeah, but there's that buzz, electronic buzz.
I know. I think there's a electricity fluctuation, so you can carry on. Unmute yourself, Raju. Unmute yourself, please.
Hello.
Yeah, speak.
Rama talks about Varta. Varta being in some sense, the economic activity or kind of the bigger Arthashastra, where he talks about commerce being a tool for well-being of the society, for sustained prosperity, unlike the current times. And that is what we saw in our ashram, where you are free to take up commerce, but provided. And in fact, if you look at that interview and in which Swami granted to Radio Sai Brothers during its inauguration, Swami says, "I have nothing to do with this, but since it gives you satisfaction, since it kind of becomes a mode for your evolution, I am blessing you with this opportunity." Now, very clearly, Swami states the purpose in those two lines. Even commerce was undertaken for that reason alone. You're muted, brother.
I said for a growth and sustenance of the society, you need commerce. But when commerce get diverted for only self need, self development, selfish needs, then it becomes a problem. So in the ashramic thought, in the Vedic thought process, commerce was for enhancement of the society, for the development, for flourishing of the cultures. So it starts with self-reliance, and then it leads to the growth and development of the society and the nation. So the focus, as you said, the intent of the commerce is never or should not be self-centered. It should be outwardly, that I am doing commerce for growth. First, self-reliance, that I am independent, but it should lead into the growth and development of the society. That is the key of commerce. And this is what I find in Prashanti Bhagwan's model. In fact, when in the commercial sense also, when Swami was teaching us, many of the younger students may not even know that, Bhagwan said to us, Now you have got the skills, go and work. First he would say go and serve, and then sometimes he would flip the word and say go and work, and he would turn back and said don't negotiate for salary. Can you imagine that? Can you imagine today telling your college graduates that don't negotiate for salary? That was Bhagwan's instruction in that time. He said, I want you to go and work. Salary will come, but your focus should not be salary. And that time I used to always wonder, like, Swami, it is, a rat race, it's a cutting edge, it's a competition. But then when you read the preamble of our college, university, when Bhagwan, first statement Bhagwan has made there, and it is still in the website, it says, I have not opened this university for you to make your degrees as a begging bowl for asking for money as salaries. I have opened this university for your self-development and self-realization. So imagine the whole concept of Bhagwan from education, his expectation from his graduates, from his education was different. So even to our batch, he would tell that don't negotiate for salary. Can you imagine that? He didn't tell this openly, and I understand why he didn't tell, because people may not. But it is very funny that he could even mention that. But he said, carry on. And then later on in life, he showed how he was in control. So what jobs we got, what placements we got, we thought we are applying, but the master was pulling the strings. And that stories are very beautiful in life to understand. When he says, do not worry, go and work, serve. In fact, he told one boy very beautifully, he said, I know you are an MBA, so now they'll give you an air-conditioned office. You should not sit in the office. So he has not got his job yet. But Swami said that since you're an MBA and you're getting into an industry, they'll give you a job and you will have an office, air-conditioned. Don't sit in the office. When you have time, go out in the front floor, and work with the workers. Learn from lower first grade people, and then you will grow from there and you will learn properly. So imagine his version of commerce was very different. So he did not say commerce is not good. He never discounted anything. As you said rightly, that studio boy said, Swami, you want a studio? He said, have it. Somebody had said, Swami, we want a Casio piano for music. He said, have it. So anything you ask, he would give. But the intent of that was not to play music or to have studio. But the intent was, through music and through studio, if you can think of God more, then it is worth it. If God is the prime focus for any activity, then it's fine. You need gymnastics, have it. You need college, have it. You need music, you have it. But think of God. If your passion says, I want to be a painter, paint. But think of God. See, that is the beauty of Swami. And that is where I find the commercial activity fits in right there. Because we think that I need a few more extra clothes, I need some house, something, decorate my place. Fair enough, have it. But think of me, think of God. So commerce is required for self-reliance to start with, but then it expands to the development and growth of the society, which is God-oriented. That is the key, I feel.
Absolutely. Absolutely, brother. And when you spoke of the manager being the MBA graduate going into manager, and R, as Swami defines, the definition of R is role of rules. Swami has always emphasized that you should give the due respect that the government of the land deserves. Follow the rules of the land, and it's exactly what we saw in Ashram. The Ashram was independent in its management. Now, it is an entity by itself, and it could kind of act on its own on various aspects. But however, it had immense respect to the rule of the land. At no point of time would we see Swami encouraging anyone to kind of disobey the government rules. He would be, in fact, the first and foremost person to follow the rules of the land. I remember in one of the interviews where Swami had by then moved on to the wheelchair. He was acting in that phase of the bodily appearance that he cannot stand, and the conversation was happening about Janagana Mana, and everybody should be standing up. So Swami was that he's the Lord of the universe. Is that Bharata Bhagya Vidata, as we call him, and in that humility he says, he just looks at his knees and is looking very pitifully at the student, kind of saying that, I can't stand, you should excuse me. That was the expression on his face, and immediately student realized that, Swami, everybody not stand, there are exceptions to the to the etiquette. And then Swami went on to the converse. But my point is, how sensitive was Swami. Swami showed us by his example. This entire ashram setup of Prashanthil and Puttaparthi is is for us to follow. It is for us to imbibe and to expand it on a global scale. Now, imagine this ideal Ramarajya being the entire Ramarajya of the country, or it being expanding to the world. How wonderful would the world be? What a harmonious place it would be to live in.
Certainly. Raju, I would like you to look at this slide and give us, because there are many viewers who might not be exposed to our Vidyagiri Prashanti campus in that manner. Just for them, for an exposure purposes, I would like you to just give us an educational stream areas of specialization, what all things are happening in Prashanti, to get an idea as to how Bhagavan encourages the different streams of learning.
It is it's a massive scale of uh, operation that happen in Prashant Lane. You have right from the commerce graduates taking up research into various areas of commerce, and then specializing themselves in the fields of trade, in the fields of business management, etc. To physics streams taking up research and advanced. You know that the world class laboratory that has come up, which has some of the best instruments in the world, and the advanced research activities in physics and chemistry are kind of taking place there. And you have the mathematics doing the high-end modeling consulting for various government organizations. This is on the secular education front. But if you also look at the arts, you have the music classes, you have music college, Department of Music, teaching the nuance of music to the students. And apart from that, the entire cultural activity in the ashram makes you an expert in various other fields. The self-reliance activity in the hostel makes you a carpenter, it makes you an artist, it makes you a sculptor, or it makes you a kind of blacksmith in some sense. And if you look at
I think
the
you should
dramas,
point
cultural
out.
activities,
Yeah, you should
sorry.
point out that that's the 11th January fanfare, that humongous program which students create. All the props are made by students in house. So please
Absolutely.
highlight that part.
Exactly. In fact, everything, right from the costume to the massive structure, everything was stitched by. It is designed by the students. It is executed by the students. It is presented by the students. In fact, I remember in one of the conversations where Swami was explaining to one of the ministers. It was shared by a senior brother, and he talks about how Swami talks about how the tiny tots from primary school were taken care. The teachers are taking care of their dress, their appearance, and all that. And this minister kind of disbelieves. He says it's not possible to do all these things at this scale, at this perfection by the inmates of the ashram is not possible. And uh, so one of his relatives happened to be from the school. So the program gets over. Now he comes down from the VIP level to a relative who goes and meet. He wants to go and meet his cousin's son. He gets into the hostel, and then the kid comes out with that entire decoration, and he goes and meets his uncle, and this kid is talking about how his teachers had actually designed this entire dress. He asked him two, three times, saying that, is it true that is it your teachers? He says, it is not even my teachers, it's actually my seniors who actually stitched this beautiful beading. And this man goes back to Mandir shocked. And Swami comes back and explains again, saying that it is the love of the Lord that enables them to do all these things. And it is a template that Swami kind of gave to the world as to what an education system should be. If you look at the way in which Ramayana also talks about education culture and systems, is exactly how it is taken up. You look at the conversation between Sri Ramachandra and Vasishtha. It starts off at a very mundane level as to how to manage the body, and then it goes off into a tangential philosophical deep philosophies. And Swami describes that the father and the mothers were engrossed in that conversation, while all the ashram inmates were carrying on with their activities. My point is, it was not something different that they were. No, it is not something out of the normal that Rama was doing. Probably Rama was at an advanced level, but the philosophies that were discussed were appearing to be the norm of the day. And it is the same Rama who next day goes and cleans Vasishtha's ashram. In fact, Swami talks about how in one of the conversations, I remember where when Dasharatha is entering, he sees Rama kind of cleaning up the ashram, and Dasharatha is very satisfied that Rama is cleaning the ashram in a befitting manner. Why I am saying this is the parent is also tuned. No, I have read of a case news in. I wish I could get the clipping, because it was one of these metropolitan cities where a father, he happens to be one of the leading figures of a company. He was so insulted that when he saw his kid taking off cleaning the school, he felt very insulted, and he kind of complained. He made a hue and cry of as to how his kid is being ill-treated. This is the mindset of the current teachers, current.
You know, there was a news about Japanese schools in Japan. What I understand is that it is part of their culture in the school system for children to clean their classrooms and toilets. And that was a news, and that was flashed around the whole Western hemisphere to show that how children are growing there. So, you know, when you look at that and you smile that Swami has been making us do this from 50 years back. So this whole system of self-reliance, of maintenance was going on. So for us, it is not a surprise to see the children are cleaning. If you did not do that, then it was a surprise, like, why are you not doing it? Because, you know, sweeping, mopping was part of growing up. So you understand that this is what you are saying. When Dashrath looked at Ram doing that, it was not a surprise, it was a contentment that my son has learnt. Right. And he's doing it well. See, that is the beauty of it. Because in fact, all of them had that there is a philosophy that you have to be prepared for everything. So you never know what tomorrow would bring. Not that Dashratha expected Ram to go to forest, but the system of education and the life was such that they prepared the children for any adversities, any situation. In fact, Sita was supposed to be, when the Sita and all the ladies, of course they were also going to Gurukul and Ashram, but they were separate in that way. But she learned culinary, and it seems they say by the time she was 8 years old, she was an excellent cook, and she could cook complicated dishes. And that is how proficient she was with the art of culinary and everything else. She was a very good artist. She could paint. She was the description of Mother Sita is also very beautiful. And her mother takes her to kitchen when she was around 6 years old, and they start showing off. And sometimes you wonder that if you are a queen, if you are a daughter of a king, and that means you are a queen, a princess yourself, and you have 100 servants around you. So why should a queen go to the kitchen? Why should a princess learn this art? Where is the need for it? But it was not that the queen has to cook or a princess has to cook tomorrow, but it is only when you indulge in that manner, you have an ability to empathize with the activity.
Absolutely.
See, Sita knew exactly what it takes to cook, what it takes to prepare. Somebody said they prepared, and there's a surprise element in the story which will come later on probably. Sita is asked to prepare something, and she makes the dishes, number of dishes, in a very short time. And people are not surprised that she made it. People are surprised how come she did it so fast. So there's a surprise element which discussion happened, and the parents are asking, did Sita take any help from anybody? Like,
Yes.
has she learned so much? What has she done that she did so fast? So which means it was
Yes.
not a surprise that she's cooking. The surprise element was the speed of Sita.
And in fact, well, this is another point that Ramayana gives, and also Swami kind of showed us the gender parity. There is no difference in the skills endowed, in the way in which the genders were treated. There is absolute parity. There is no discrimination. You look at, yeah, the way in which you dress, the way in which you behave is different, but equal facilities were provided to both of them. There is no discrimination. Both of them were treated as the forms of divine. You look at, for example, the way in which Kausalya, Kaikeyi, Sumitra were consulted in the decision making by Dasharatha himself, or the way in which Sulochana, Sita's mother, comes and advises Janaka himself that he should
Even
not be
Ravan's
giving-
wife,
Absolutely, Mandodari, yes.
Mandodari, was an excellent. Kekai was excellent in warfare herself. She teaches Rama and other children afterwards certain skills.
Exactly, and in fact, she was the one. It is because of her warfare skills that Dasharatha kind of marries her and then promises that he will make her son as the king. Or on the other extreme, or you have the Lopamudra, the wife of Agastya, wife of Bharadwaja, wife of Yajnavalkya. All of them are philosophers, great thinkers, and other side you
Gargi,
have
Mother
absolutely.
Gargi, absolutely amazing, scholar.
A scholar, yes, and Swami beautifully describes the conversation between Gargi and Yajnavalkya in that Janaka spoke. Uh, but the bigger point is society was built in such a beautiful manner that both man and women were treated equal. Probably the dressings would have differed, probably the way in which they conducted themselves would have differed, but there was no discrimination. They
The
were treated
Varnasram
equal.
could define that activity they undertook.
Absolutely.
Based on
Yes.
their aptitude of a lady, that's what I think beautiful it is. The ladies also followed the Varnashram concept of what is their prime responsibility and duty, they did it. But when it comes to the learning and growing, they were free to choose whatever they liked.
Exactly. This is what we see even in our Prashant Nilayam.
Absolutely fantastic. And yes, you're right. I think there's a very good point that in Swami's arena, the first official college was Anantapur College.
It was Anantapur campus.
Right? And there are roles which our sisters and mothers perform in Prashanti. It's unparalleled, unmatched. They are starting from taking care of the mandir flower decoration and cleaning and sweeping the mandir up to heading a university complex. We have representation of our women folk perfectly done in Prashanti model. So I think, Raju, today time is also coming to an end. We have covered, and next session we would like to jump into a concept called Rama Rajya. We have been hearing, we use the terminology, but let us jump into it, dive deeper, and understand what is that concept which Ram himself proposed and which Bhagwan Baba implemented. What is the concept of Rama Rajya? So probably next session would be based on that. Fair enough, Raju?
Yes.
Anything,
Yes.
any parting comments for today?
I have nothing more to say, but just to add that with what I started, that we should have that Sukshma Buddhi, as Swami says, the Gayatri Mantra, Dhiyo Yona Prachodayat, enlighten me with that intelligence to understand the deeper meanings of your actions. I was stunned even during our discussions when this comparison came up, that we saw the model of Ramarajya right in front of our eyes. In fact, at some points of time, we were part of it and never realized the blessing that that we were endowed. And we today talk of Ramarajya being something else.
See, the concept that Ram Rajya will come, or what is Ram Rajya, when you look at our Bhagwan, you realize that it is already here. And so when Bhagwan made a statement that golden age is here, we always
Right.
questioned and wondered what is he meaning, what he's saying. But probably we were so blinded by our own concept that we were failing to see the manifestation of golden age right in front of our eyes, and we denied it. So being part of Ram Rajya, and we still don't know it. We were part of Sai Yug, we were part of the golden age. We are actually the part of that golden age. And today, in next session, we will explore that golden age, as we call it, and as philosophically we call it Ram Rajya. So we look at it. And I thank all the viewers for their so valuable inputs. And if you have any questions, suggestions, please continue to send us. And if you think that we have missed something or we would like to add something, feel free to suggest us and write to us. Thank you very much. May Swami bless all of us. Sai Ram. Sai Ram, Brother Raju.
Sai Ram.